Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm a little more nervous than the member from Dillingham about having a bill up on April Fool's Day. I received a text last night around midnight. It was a welcome text from a young woman who's sitting in the gallery, Becca Shear. I had no idea she was coming down, and she said she'd be here for this. She survived many of the challenges in her life that this bill is about. Becca, in 8 years in foster care, lived in 24 different foster homes. I'm not sharing anything that she hasn't shared with all of you already. A young woman by the name of Rachel Bedsworth, who was here a couple weeks ago, in her childhood, had to survive through 50 different foster homes. 50. More than 50. She's at UAA now, and she's doing well. She's a hero, and Becca's a hero in my mind. But we should have a system, a foster care system, that does not require you to become a hero to survive. This bill aims to give people a better chance to succeed through a foster care system without damage, without being bounced between 10, 20, 30, 40, or 50 homes. That in itself is neglect and abuse, the same neglect and abuse we're trying to prevent, just in a different form and an institutional one. I've got to say, I know more children today who are succeeding than were many years ago. That's the good news. This legislature has done good things. The success stories are very nice to hear. But we still have a 35% homelessness rate in the state for youth coming out of foster care. That includes youth who couch surf, which the federal government doesn't count as homelessness anymore. 24% of our youth end up in jail at some point coming out of foster care. We can do better, Mr. Speaker. This bill has support letters from the state's lead agency on the prevention of child abuse and neglect, the Alaska Children's Trust. They say very briefly, Mr. Speaker, that the bill, with your permission, that the bill will help reduce the impact of trauma by taking steps to get youth out of foster care into loving homes, to reduce new incidents of adverse childhood experiences, and build resilience among Alaska's children. The bill does a few things, Mr. Speaker. There are a number of national and state organizations that have supported this bill. Those letters are in the packet, including a very well-known bipartisan organization from Washington, D.C. that advocates for change. First, this bill does something that the law calls permanency. And that's a weird word. That means getting a child into a permanent loving home. Right now, we have more and more children coming into the foster care system, but not enough leaving. We have very young social workers who often don't last in their jobs for more than a year, less than a year often. And so they get through their training period, they work a few months, and the system burns them out and they're gone. And so what happens is you get social workers who don't have the experience to deal with the massive caseloads that they have. And we need a double check in the system. And the double check will be this. During the regular status hearings that we have in court, our court will ask the caseworker who is overburdened and who may be very young. Really, that's the bigger problem. Very young, very inexperienced, hasn't been on the job very long. Have you done what's needed to get a child into a permanent home? Have you contacted the extended family members? I know a case where a child was 16 years old before they found out that he had a grandparent and an aunt and an uncle that could have taken care of him, he and his brother. So they lived in the foster care system all 18 years because nobody made the calls to those family members. So this bill simply will have a court be able to have the power to say, have you done and taken reasonable steps to look for a permanent home for a child who might be bouncing between home and home and home. And just to tell you how badly we're doing on getting children into loving homes, Mr. Speaker, we have 700 children who are waiting for an adoptive home, but who are languishing. And let me just tell you how that stacks compared to the other 50 states. It's the second worst number in the 50 states that we have right now. In Maryland, they have roughly half the number of youth waiting for a permanent home with 4 times the population. In New Hampshire, they have a quarter of the youth waiting for a permanent home. In Idaho, where they have twice the population, they have a third of the number of youth waiting for a permanent home. In Utah, they have fewer youth waiting for a permanent home, and they have 4 times our population. We're not doing well, Mr. Speaker. What we can do to get children into a permanent home, whatever we can do will be good. And we do need that court check, that double check in the system if there's no supervisor to do the right work, to say, have you done what's needed to get a child into a permanent home? And if you haven't, please go make sure you contact the family members and do that family search, because there are often loving, waiting family members that OCS doesn't know about. Mr. Speaker, there's a national movement by these organizations I told you about. Jim Casey, the founder of UPS, made foster care his passion, and he has the Casey Family Foundation and a related organization, and they have pushed and succeeded in roughly half the states, including ours, to allow foster care, if needed, to last until age 21. And you're only supposed to, but we only have a protection to drop a child out of foster care and get a court determination that that's in the child's best interest for children up to 18. So between 18 and 21, an inexperienced social worker can say you're ready to go out on your own. Child becomes one of those 35% of kids who end up homeless, or 25% of kids who end up in jail. They're not ready. It wasn't in their best interest to kick them out of foster care and put them out on the street. So this will close that loophole and say even for children between 18 and 21 at the status hearing, a court gets to ask and determine what's the evidence that it's in the best interest of the child to send them out on their own without a responsible adult. Sometimes it will be in their best interest. But this will be a double check on the system, so children aren't put out on their own with no evidence. And so fewer mistakes are made there. This is to protect children too. Mr. Speaker, family placements are among the best placements sometimes for a child. But outside of the first 30 days when a child is taken away from their parents, when OCS is supposed to do a search for family members who might be good adoptive or foster parents, they're not required to do it afterwards. And so we add a requirement that at every one of these status hearings, when a child is moved to a new home, before they're moved to a new home and a new home and a new home and 50 new homes maybe, that OCS makes sure that they've done their family search to see if there's a grandparent out there or an aunt out there or an uncle out there that's willing to take the child in, so they're not constantly living with strangers and bouncing between homes. That's another important thing the bill does. Casey Family Foundation also has pushed on the national and state level to say this. We know, and it's in your packet on the second to last page, we know that every time you move a child from one school to another school to another school to another school, a child falls 4 months behind. And there are times where it's okay to move a child from one school to another, but that has to be in the child's best interests. And so the bill says that if a child is moved from one placement to another within a municipality on the road system, obviously you would never want to keep a child in the same school if they move from Anchorage to Wasilla or Anchorage to Bethel. But if they're in the same municipality and it's in the child's best interests, OCS is supposed to work to let that child finish their school term in the same school. And the amendment that you saw will also involve family members and the foster family and other interested parties to help make that decision, whether that's in their best interest. This will help children succeed, Mr. Speaker. There are a few other small provisions of the bill. One of note is we do need more foster parents and more adoptive parents. And many of us have tried to recruit foster parents and adoptive parents, but we've added to the duties of the department that, you know, when the commissioner is out in front of a group of 200 people, she's allowed to, or the governor's allowed to pitch that we could use some more foster parents and some more adoptive parents. So that's no cost, but that's something that we're going to add to their duties. And we have sent the message, of course, that means that when they're in front of big groups, they get to pitch and explain the problem. So, Mr. Speaker, the bill aims to give children stability. It aims to give them the same chance of success other people have. It will improve a number of lives. With a bill that does not have a fiscal note, I can't say I'm changing the world, but I've got to work within the constraints that the state has in its budget right now. So, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate all the co-sponsors. I appreciate all the people who have helped on this bill. I appreciate all the children who have worked so hard to succeed. And I would ask for your support. Thank you.